Secret of the Mimic is one of the best Five Nights at Freddy's games we've ever gotten, but one of the biggest questions surrounding it is how does it connect to the rest of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise? When a game like this comes out and it has so much lore and so much stuff to say, its volumes will reverberate amongst the rest of the timeline, and it's our job as theorists to figure out where those reverberations lie. But in order to figure out how this game connects to the rest of the franchise, something we have to do is figure out how the game actually ends. We need to know what's actually going on in these endings, and which one of the endings is actually canon. After all, there's 3 endings and only one of them could have happened. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Now obviously, before we can explain the deeper meaning behind these endings and what's actually going on behind the scenes, we need to be clear on what the scenes themselves are. In other words, let's just refresh what actually happens in front of our eyes in these endings. In the first, and probably worst ending in the game, once you return to the security office after receiving executive permissions, dispatch over the radio says that your job is complete. We can simply hand in the data diver through the inventory system and be on our merry way. So we do that. We turn in the data diver and return to our van, which was moved to the garage. But once we start driving away from the facility, dispatch calls us over the radio again, tells us that he's been trying to get a hold of us, but because we haven't answered, we're going to be fired, and when Arnold explains that he just gave the data diver to Dispatch, Dispatch accuses him of giving away Fazbear technology and that he'll be sued. But he doesn't have time to deal with any of that, because right as the radio call is over, the Mimic reveals itself from the back of the van and attacks Arnold. We then cut to the inside of Freddy's mouth. Well, either Prototype Freddy or Prototype Fredbear, it's unclear, while the animatronics on stage are giving a performance to none other than M2, the Mimic endoskeleton that just attacked us. This is an insane ending, and they only get more crazy, because the other 2 endings are achieved when you refuse to give the data diver to Dispatch through the inventory system. If instead of handing over the data diver, you run parachute.exe with your newly found executive permissions, you open a secret hatch that leads you all the way down to research and development. And once inside, we find an entire prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And in there, we learn that the dispatch we've been talking to is actually M1, or F10N4, the robotic recreation of Fiona, Edwin Murray's late wife. She doesn't explain much to us as she's about to run out of power, but she basically says, "Look, you beat me. Can you at least give the blueprints over to my husband Edwin so he can fix M2 so it can stop being a violent psychopath and go back to being my kid?" So we make our way to Murray's actual manor, the old mansion on the hill. And once we make it into Edwin's office, we find that he's actually been long dead, after he got trapped under rubble in his lab and M2 refused to call for help. We're then cornered by the Mimic, so we run cradle.exe and we begin to run out of the facility as it begins to explode and crumble around us. On the way down in the elevator, M1 reaches out one final time to who she thinks is Edwin, asking him to please fix M2 so she can have her child again. We then encounter the Mimic and have one final chase sequence while the Mimic and several weird little robot creatures are chasing us out of the facility, but Arnold makes it out and back to his van. Not far enough though, as those little creatures and the Mimic itself is on his van trying to make him crash, and they do so. In the rubble, the Mimic approaches our van, lifts it, and instead of going for the kill, simply takes the data diver, attaches it to its chest, and walks away. Little side note that I'm not going to really get into on this video, I think these little creatures are the Mimic mimicking Edwin's inventions. I've seen some people say that this was Edwin's failed M2s. I think it's much more likely that the Mimic saw Edwin making stuff and went, I can make stuff too, and just started making little guys. But I do love these little guys. Now, ending 3 happens on a New Game Plus playthrough, where if you've collected every single collectible and beaten all of Moon.exe, which I explained in this video right here, you receive the glitched permission from Sun in Moon.exe, which allows you to open the other secret doors in the manor at the end of the game. That way, instead of going into Edwin's office, you can repair the storybook tape player. And if you do so and use it to tell a story to the Mimic, you're able to try to force it back into being David, and in its confused state, you stun it enough to be able to upload the original Mimic blueprints to the Mimic, which effectively resets it back into being David, and as David, M2 goes and puts itself to sleep. This is probably the best ending for Arnold because, well, every other ending seems to kill him. So that's what happens as we see it. But I hear you. What is exactly going on here? Why do some endings have the Mimic steal the data diver? Some endings kill Arnold, others don't. What is all going on? That bar is really starting to fill up. I don't know how much longer I'll be on this floor. Oh, a sponsorship. Today's video is brought to you by Fume. I have such a problem maintaining focus while I'm trying to work. I'll be trying to write or edit, but I'll feel myself itching to grab my smartphone and just start doom scrolling. But luckily, thanks to Fume, I'm able to trade that bad habit for a better one. Now, to be incredibly clear, Fume is not a vape. There's no vapor, no nicotine, it's not an e-cig or anything like that. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that delivers a great taste without any of those harmful chemicals. Instead of inhaling vapor, you simply breathe in natural, non-toxic flavors that satisfy the cravings without the downside. It's sleek, portable, and easy to carry around with you. But most importantly to me is that this has been designed to fidget with. From its magnetically locking frame to its clicking adjustment, down to the optional Fume topper that's made out of chewable silicone, so if you're a chewer like me, you can go to town. Over 500,000 people have already made the switch to Fume in their habit change journey. And if you're ready to try it for yourself, now is the time. For a limited time, if you order the Journey Pack with my code RYTOAST, you'll get a free Fume topper, an awesome accessory to level up your experience. Click the link tryfume.com/RYTOAST or scan the QR code on screen to get yours today. Thanks again to Fume for sponsoring today's video. Oh, this bar is getting so close. I hope this actually means I get to leave this floor. I've been here forever. Although, this floor has been generally comfortable compared to some of the others, so maybe I'm not that excited to leave. Well, to understand that, we need to talk about one of the major antagonists of this game, Dispatch, or more accurately, M1. After all, the real Dispatch, otherwise known as the top to Arnold's bottom, is only heard in the van itself. I believe once we're in the facility, Dispatch never talks to Arnold the entire time. That's all M1. So if we can figure out what M1's true motivations and goals are, everything will start to make a bit more sense. M1 seems to be the first successful standalone iteration of the Mimic program, one that was solely trained on replicating Fiona's personality. M1 is the Mimic program that was specifically trained on Fiona, kind of like how Glitchtrap seems to be specifically trained on William, but we'll get there eventually. And luckily, it's not hard to elucidate exactly what M1 wants to happen in this game. Pretty directly through the email logs and some of the audio logs we find throughout the game, M1's sole goal is to repair M2 so she can have her child again, because she sees M2 as her child. After all, it was made off of a copy of her own program and began mimicking her real-life counterpart's son, David. I'm getting covered in so much mark for my nose is going crazy. And once we keep in mind that all M1 wants is M2 to be repaired and to be David again, this starts to color everything we see in these endings to make everything make a bit more sense. Starting with the first ending. Oh, are we done? You can't really see it on the camera, but I'm like covered in fur. As far as the first ending goes, one of the more confusing parts about it is the sincerity of M1. Obviously, M1 is lying to us and pretending to be Dispatch, but after we hand over the data driver, M1 as Dispatch keeps telling us we are free to go. We can simply enter our van and leave. But then once we do, the Mimic catches and kills us anyway. So was this a lie? I don't think so. It seems fairly clear that throughout the entirety of the game, M1 and M2 are at odds. M2 just wants to kill anybody who enters the facility, but M1 does seem to genuinely want to contain M2 and fix it. And if people die in the process, that sucks, but if M1 can prevent it, M1 will. Because again, M1 is sending Arnold through all these fetch quests. Why would M1 bother doing so if M1 was trying to kill Arnold with the Mimic? Clearly, M2 and M1 are not working together. And likewise, in this ending, M1 got everything she wanted. She finally has the data diver to repair M2, so as far as she's concerned, Arnold is not an issue anymore. Arnold is free to go, and I believe she genuinely tries to let Arnold leave, but the Mimic, or M2, isn't having it. So then, if that's what happens, why is there this performance during the credits sequence? Well, M1, or Fiona, has the data diver to repair M2 now, but as we learned in the other two endings, Fiona can't repair M2 on her own. She is stuck inside a computer. She can manipulate stuff in the facility, but she can't hold down M2 and upload the blueprints to its endoskeleton. She needs a third party to do so. In most of the endings of the game, she only trusts Edwin to do so, as Edwin is the one who invented herself, M2, and the Mimic endoskeleton in general. So according to what she tells Arnold, the emails she sends, and even some of the audio logs, Fiona's plan is to obtain the M2 blueprints, give them to Edwin, and have Edwin fix M2. But unbeknownst to her, Edwin is dead. So while she's waiting for Edwin, she needs to stall for time. And that's where I think the performance comes in. The Mimic is pretty much constantly chasing Arnold and always trying to kill him. But the one time the Mimic never interrupts anything is during performances. Now, this may be because Arnold is seemingly not there within the Captain Springlock suit, or because the Mimic might just like performances. The one thing that the Mimic never really interrupts is the Puppet Pirate show. And I like to think that the Mimic is nearby simply watching it. After all, the Mimic was backstage right beforehand and at the nurse's office right after. So I have a feeling the Mimic just likes to watch these performances. And similarly, in the credit sequence, we see this, where while the prototype Freddy animatronics are performing, the Mimic is standing there watching, not pacing, not looking for Arnold, not even pretending to be something, but just existing as itself, watching this show. And I think M1 is aware of that fact, and is using this performance to try to keep M2 locked away in research and development while she waits for Edwin to get here to repair him. And I want to be clear here, I don't think M2 likes to watch these performances because M2 is currently being David. In this scene in the credits, M2 seemingly isn't being David. We see what M2 looks like when it is being David, smaller with blue eyes. That's not what M2 looks like in this first sequence. M2 is being itself, watching this performance, and M1 is hoping that Edwin gets here before M2 gets bored. But unfortunately, as we find out in the other endings, Edwin will never arrive. But even if Edwin was alive, how could he repair the Mimic? Well, we get to see how it would work in Ending 3. This is that secret ending you get when you beat Moon.exe and receive the glitched permission. This is the only ending where Fiona trusts Arnold enough to handle the repair himself. And in that ending, that's exactly what we do. Using this storytime book, we're able to distract and stun the Mimic enough so that we can manually repair it by uploading the original Mimic blueprints to the endoskeleton, which resets the whole thing. And that's what's actually going on here. It seems like this pre-recorded story time is enough to actually affect the internal programming of M2, whether or not it's a failsafe of hearing Edwin and Fiona's voice, or if it's just the internal conflict of parts of M2 wanting to be David and parts of M2 wanting to be itself. So it seems like to repair M2, all Edwin would have had to do is take his executive access data diver with the Mimic schematics and upload it to the M2 endoskeleton, something that would fully reset it and send it back to David. And he might have been able to stun it himself with just using his own voice, as long as he was reading the proper story time. So if the first ending is Fiona stalling M2 until Edwin hopefully one day comes down and fixes the Mimic, and the third ending is Arnold fixing the Mimic directly, what is the second ending? One that I think is probably the hardest to explain. Well, when we find Edwin's office empty, Arnold has to improvise as the Mimic is right behind him. And in Edwin's secret office, Arnold ends up running a program called Cradle.exe, and this is what begins to set everything in motion. It's after this that the manor and the factory begin falling apart. But what is Cradle.exe? Well, in this email, Fiona pretty explicitly states that Cradle.exe is a program created to contain M2, or at least M2's personality, and it would need a fairly massive computer for it to run properly. The whole idea behind it being that if M2 were properly contained, then Edwin could work tirelessly on a fix for M2 without the imminent threat of it killing him or anyone else at the facility. So if that's what Cradle.exe is supposed to do, why is it that when we run it, we're still chased by the Mimic and everything still goes wrong? Well, let's think a little bit more about Cradle.exe. If it's a program meant to contain a digital persona, and it needs a massive computer to do so, this sounds a lot like the MXES console, especially since we now know that stands for Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage. The acronym literally means that it's an experimental storage unit for mechanical forms. Now, as far as MXES consoles go, there may be more than one. After all, the console we run Cradle.exe on says that it's MXES number 1. But as far as we've seen, there's only one console. This could just denote that there was planned to be multiple, but this was only the first one that was ever made. Throughout the entire game, we only see one console, that being the one that M1 is currently inside of, the F10N4 console. I stated in my last video that I believe M1 and M2 both inhabited the Mimic endoskeleton, just at different times. At first, M1 was inside the endoskeleton, but eventually when Edwin realized how incredibly unhealthy all of this is, I believe he moved her personality into the MXES console, and then later when developing M2, uploaded it to that endoskeleton. So all this to say, before we run Cradle.exe, M1 is contained within the MXES console, and M2 is within the endoskeleton. So if Cradle.exe was a program designed to take the M2 personality and put it inside of the MXES storage container, what if running Cradle.exe swapped the positions of M1 and M2? Or at least if M2 was placed inside of the MXES console and locked away, M1 would now have a perfectly usable endoskeleton that it could re-enter. So what if during this elevator ride, right after we run Cradle.exe, M1 re-enters the Mimic endoskeleton? This whole ride down, M1 thinks that we are Edwin, and she is begging us to stay and repair the Mimic. After all, from her perspective, she sent an engineer with the exact thing that Edwin needs to fix M2, and then that engineer gained access to Edwin's office, and then somebody inside Edwin's office is starting to run away. Literally, she gave him the keys to the city, and he ran away with them. M1 herself states that she values her child more than Edwin. So if Edwin decided to turn tail and run, then this would be the perfect time to go get him and make him fix M2. And it's right after that whole monologue that the chase begins. And this is why, even after Arnold gets away into his van and crashes, at his most vulnerable, the Mimic does not kill Arnold. In the first ending, while he's driving, the Mimic goes for the kill. In the third ending, the Mimic tries to kill Arnold several times, but he defends himself with the storytime player. But in this ending, the second ending, the one where Arnold is trapped underneath a van and completely helpless, when the Mimic approaches us, it does not kill us. It lifts the van, takes the data diver, and leaves us be. Just like in the first ending, where when we turned in the data diver, M1 tried to let us leave. M1 doesn't care about killing Arnold. M1 wants the data diver more than anything. In fact, I think this interpretation could explain the weird walk that the Mimic does during this ending sequence. Throughout the rest of the game, the Mimic is very quick and efficient in its movements. If it sees you in any of its costumes, it does a full sprint to catch you. This thing is fast. But during this chase sequence, the Mimic is not sprinting anymore. It is generally fast walking after us. And after the crash, the Mimic looks like it can barely walk at all. It seems to be limping or waddling, trying to move, as if every part of it is rusty. Almost like M1, who has been stuck in the MXES console for some unknowable amount of time, just recently got re-uploaded to the endoskeleton and has to learn to walk again. And now that M1, as the Mimic, has the data diver, hopefully she can make her way back to the Murray's Costume Manor and try to fix everything. But of course, when she'd get back there, the whole facility would be burned to the ground, and she'd have to start burying herself in the rubble to find M2 and the console that it's inside of. So if that's what all the endings mean, the ultimate question is, which ending is the canon one? Which one actually happened in the timeline and connects it to the other games? Well, this is hard to nail down, and there's really no wrong answer here as of yet. But the way I see it, there's really only one most likely option here. Ending 1 is a bit too ambiguous. There's a lot of loose ends still open, and eventually M2 may get bored of this showtime, and Fiona has no way to stop M2 after this ending. So if ending 1 is canon, something else must happen before the events of the rest of the games. And ending 3 is incredibly unlikely, because if the Mimic was fixed and returned back to being David, why is it suddenly an enemy again in Ruin? It would seem pretty redundant to fix the Mimic and then have it become a villain again for seemingly no reason, which is why I think ending 2 is our most likely answer here. And if so, this lines up fairly well with what we see in Security Breach and Ruin. After all, if M1 is still inside of the Mimic endoskeleton, then the Mimic's actions in Ruin line up perfectly with how Fiona acts in Secret of the Mimic, pretending to be someone else over a radio to trick someone into coming downstairs and releasing M2. M1 needs Cassie to fix M2, especially since M1 is currently locked in a separate room fully covered by cement. So M1 pretending to be Gregory over the walkie-talkie is 1000% in M1's wheelhouse. And if M2 is still locked inside the MXES console, then it being this entity lashing out at any human walking in the Pizzaplex makes perfect sense. And then what do we do at the end of Ruin? We activate a protocol in the MXES console, and we see the entity get sucked inside of it. But what if, just like Cradle.exe, all we're doing is swapping where M1 and M2 reside, putting M1 back in the MXES console and putting M2 back in the Mimic endoskeleton? Isn't it notable that throughout the entire game, the Mimic is speaking like Gregory, but the moment we encounter it, it makes this brand new amalgamate voice, just like how M2 sounds in Secret of the Mimic. But that's my thoughts on the endings and how they line up with the rest of the games. This is still very in the headspace, and I could see myself changing my mind on what the second ending is even telling us. So what do you think about these endings, and which one do you think is canon? I genuinely would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. In the meantime, in case you missed it, on one of my Twitch streams at twitch.tv/RyToastYT, I played through the brand new Amanda the Adventurer 3 demo, and it was really good. You can see the edited video on my second channel, RyToast, right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.